So I wanted to do a video on cold plasma or plasma cluster ions um, and long-term air chemistry as I'm observing it, and also negative ions and their interplay. So I'm starting to kind of wrap my head around this, and I'm observing it, but it took quite a long time for this to kind of manifest itself in my detectable numbers, I think. So what I did is basically ran my uh, cold uh, cold plasma modified machine, the cluster ion base air, with the plates in it, because it was extremely effective locally at removing formaldehyde, and it did just that. Like wherever I put it, formaldehyde dropped to um, 0.00 etc. number. There was some, but it reduced it to nearly undetectable numbers. And I let it run all night. And I woke up and had turned my detector on just to see what the long term chemistry was like. And what I found was my pm2.5 and my PM10, which is the measure of fine particulates in the air, was through the roof with really fine particulates. And my formaldehyde levels were nothing. My VOCs were nothing. And so I started to think, and I have these diffusers, and these are putting out smells into the air, right? And that is a small amount of oil entering the air, and that's intentional, but there are other ones that are unintentional. The lacquer in the floor, for instance. So all the things that are off gassing in the room are putting little oils and such into the air, and that cold plasma or um, cluster ion is essentially burning them off, and that's why the VOCs are going down, and the formaldehyde is going down because those chemicals are being burnt off. But because of the conservation of matter and conservation of energy, the stuff doesn't disappear. So essentially, I am cooking that stuff off with this technology, but it is now an air pollutant in a different form. So my ventilator was running, so I'm breathing that air primarily, or at least my air is being diluted with outdoor air, and I'm detecting what's going on in the room, not immediately underneath my ventilator. But still, it's interesting. So at that point, I was running this unit in isolation, and this unit has an active carbon filter, so it's not lacking filtration, not even fine particulate filtration. Not top of the line HEPA active carbon, but it's still including some degree of moving air infiltration and um, ventilation. So the PM2.5, the fine particulates were way up. Normally, in my house, my formaldehyde levels would be kind of like this, right? So I'd have trace amounts depending on what room I'm in, how close I am to a vent, what the moving air, but there's zero point 0 something. Um, in the PM 2.5, previously to turning this on, would be between 5 and 10, right? And after I upgraded my PCO cell in my duct stream, my PM 2.5 in my house actually dropped to 2 UG over meter squared. It's a small amount of particulate matter. It's almost undetectable. So this is a huge increase in fine particulates, and it speaks to this thing's functionality. This thing is functionally destroying chemicals in the air, and that's a good thing. But now I have residual byproducts that are polluting my air to even more of an extreme. So what is remediated it in a relatively short time? So my pm2.5 is now down to 26. About 15 to 20 minutes ago, my pm2.5 was 50 and my pm10 was 100. So what I did was I kicked on a 250 million negative ion generator. 250, not dollars, 250 million negative ions per centimeter squared generator. And that is a very powerful, normally they're ranging from 2 to 10 million. So this is an order of magnitude. This is like having 10 to 100, depending on which one you get, 10 to 100 normal negative ion generators going in like a normal sized bedroom. So it's taking quite a lot of negative ions to compensate for the products of combustion from the cluster ions. The cluster ions produce particulate matter. Negative ions reduce particulate matter. And I'm really starting to understand why PCOs are a little bit of the best of both worlds, because you are destroying some of those chemicals, and you're not generating the particulate matter. So I do think that a PCO filter is probably the best air to breathe as a standalone unit, or at least something that integrates PCO technology. But I do think there are many roads to Rome, and one of those roads, in my opinion, based on my limited ability to detect gases in the air, is the combination of cold plasma, air filtration, and high density negative ions. In combination, I think you can reduce your formaldehyde levels and reduce your particulate matter. But these are two jacked up machines, and a normal negative ion generator, I wasn't able to detect any change in my indoor air. I had to go and buy some high power Japanese model and a voltage converter to really get a measurable impact out of negative ions. And same thing when I first tested the plasma cluster machine. As long as the electrodes were this far apart, there was no measurable change in the air. The electrodes had to be essentially filters that the air passed through. And while it passed through those diffuse metal filters, there was simultaneously a cold plasma between those two. So as the air went through, it's more of the air is exposed to less cold plasma because it's stretched out. But that's how I got a measurable effect out of this machine. With 2 electrodes, I got no measurable effect. Nothing. I had to take the negative and the positive plate and make sure that they were connected to the right materials, having the carbon fiber with a negative or with a positive charge, the TiO2 with a positive charge, and the platinum with a negative charge. That's what enabled me to make a measurable difference in formaldehyde. Prior to that, I put this thing in front of it, I couldn't tell it was on. And same thing with the little negative ion generators. You know, I put it on and this thing doesn't measure a difference. That thing, if the pm2.5 is up around 30 or 40 and I turn it on, it drops to 20 in, less than a half hour. And it's measurable. You can watch it go down right after you turn it on. But it takes a very powerful one. Standalone, I do think they are maybe both potentially dangerous. And here's the thing. Your air can become saturated with oils. In other words, the more saturated your air, you can just accelerate the generation of pm2.5. You can put a lot of fine particulates in your air because you're extracting chemicals from your air. Once your air becomes more saturated with these chemicals that may not be toxic, these items may be released less because the air is already saturated. But when you are running the equipment and you're depleting these chemicals from the air, you're potentially enabling a more rapid release from their source. And I'm thinking specifically of like intentional sources. They are going to off gas more because the air around them is depleted. And if the air around them is saturated, then they'll release less. And that's kind of a self-regulating mechanism. But if we're trying to remove those gases and we're adding them at the same time, and we're generating particulate matter, and our ventilation can't keep up with that, then we need to add more negative ions to counteract that effect. On the flip side to that, the potential risk of negative ions. This is what I'm seeing anyway. Negative ions are causing things to... This is where things get crisscrossed in my head. Anyway, what I'm measuring, what I'm observing, what this equipment seems to be doing is just that. I'm not going to get too much into the physics, my theories of things binding under different electrical states. This thing essentially, I'm pointing at a cold plasma or ion cluster machine, the one that I built yesterday. This thing is cooking oils out of the air and leaving very fine particulates behind. That thing is magnetically clinging particulates together and causing them to be more easily filtered or fall out of the air. But if you are adding that huge amount of negative ions, you will be adding particulates. Based on my detection in high numbers.